If you haven't seen Tessa's Sitting Well video, please do. I highly recommend it. It's just a great video and sort of a must if you want to get into sitting better. That's just a wonderful video. So I'm going to have a link to that video at the end of this one. But I wanted to introduce you to again, in sitting, a very classic Feldenkrais lesson. Sort of an introduction to sitting lessons in the Feldenkrais method. A very basic lesson, a very important one, because yet again, as like in most lessons that I teach, you will see that the sits bones, sitting in general, is, of course, it's mentioned, but it's much more than that. There's more of using your whole self. All right. You know where your sits bones are, especially if you've watched Tessa's video or if you've just come across that information in the past. So just briefly going over it again, reminding you, we have our ischiums or ischiums underneath our pelvis, a little rounded bone at the bottom of the base of the pelvis. And one of the simplest things you can do is simply get to know where they are so that you can begin to sit on your sits bones, which immediately would translate to being a little bit better aligned, okay? So if you are a bit of a sloucher or a bit of a person who leans back on the back of the chair, just looking for your sits bones and sitting on them would immediately, without even thinking, put you a little bit more upright and better aligned. Let's go over the lesson, okay? It begins this way. You begin with the image of making your spine, torso, kind of rigid. And I know rigid can have negative connotations, but for the purpose of this exploration, it's a constraint that is very useful. So just make everything pretty rigid, a little bit like a statue, okay? And as such, keeping this rigidity, lift your right sits bone, right? So what you end up doing is you basically end up tilting. If I'm holding my hands this way, you may have a better idea of why my spine is not curving. I'm not bending anywhere. I'm just taking the right sits bone, lifting it, and my whole spine and torso goes with it. In a classic Feldenkrais fashion, we do a lot of one side first to get to know what we're doing and how we're doing it. If you have noticed, or maybe have not, your feet need to be relaxed and flat on the floor, okay? A lot of us have these tendencies to lift a heel or to lift a foot. If you feel that that's what you do, learn to recognize it and start to do less of that, okay? Rather than tell yourself, don't do it, just simply begin to do less of it. And once you've done one side, do the other side. Rest in between. You can rest in sitting, you can rest in walking to break it up a little bit. And after you've done both sides, you can begin to alternate very simply left and right. Right? Now, in contrast, after another quick rest, you can begin to explore what it's like to lift the right sits bone, keeping the head in the middle. So what does it mean that I keep the head in the middle? This constraint of keeping the head in the middle, rather than have the head move to the left together with the rest of the body as one big piece, right, like a statue, instead we leave the head in the middle, which means that this part has to a little bit, right? Has to side bend. So here is what it may look like, and this is my personal interpretation. Of course, when you do it your own way, you'll move your way. So this is my interpretation, right? I keep my head in the middle, I lift my sits bone, and I side bend a little bit this way. And if I bring my hands the same way that I did before, they kind of emphasize, if it's a little challenging for you to see the side bending versus the clear tilting. In the tilting, there is no differentiation. I move as one big piece. In side bending, I use all of myself, but there is differentiation. I side bend, the middle of my spine moves mostly to the left. My head, if not only staying in the center, it's actually moving down to the right towards the lifting hip. Okay? And once you begin to explore it and to feel comfortable with it, you know that you got it. You do the same thing on the other side. Of course, you build some rests in between. If this is challenging and new for you, please take it easy, move slow, move small. Okay? So once you have done both sides, you're welcome to begin to alternate. So we now have two ways, two sort of clear, extreme opposing ways. One is where everything moves together and there is no flexibility to the spine. And the other one is this, right? Side bending. Now, the next step, right? The next step will be to explore what it's like to move our knees forward and back, right? So I leave my sits bones on the chair, right? And I simply begin to push one knee a little bit forward, and then the other one. And when I do that, I begin to pay attention to what goes on underneath me in the sits bones. And what I discover is that they slide gently on the chair. Slide or move over the skin of my buttocks. Okay? They kind of roll gently forward and back on the chair. Because if the knee moves forward and there is the femur bone connecting the knee to the pelvis, right? To move the knee forward, my pelvis will need to do the same thing. Okay? So this is the next step, is to just discover what it's like to simply move the sits bone forward and back. So now we have an ability to lift the sits bone in two different ways, this way and that way, and we have an ability to move the sits bones forward and back. Now we can combine those two and add a little something, right? In order to begin to walk on our sits bones, and I'm going to move back in my chair, I'm going to have to lift a sits bone, right? Lift it. I can lift it this way, I can lift it this way, or I can do my own combination of the most comfortable lifting. And then I can move this knee while the sits bone is hovering in the air. I can move this knee, travel with it a tiny bit forward, and then place this sits bone back down on the chair, shift my weight into it. Again, if you can see, I'm leaning a little bit, but I'm also side bending a little bit. And then I will move this sits bone forward together with the knee, place it down, and here goes walking on your sits bones. Now, why is walking on the sits bones such a cool thing? Well, it is. You can tell, probably. And if you've done it all your life, it may seem very simple, very natural, very intuitive for you, okay? And you would like to, and this is my strong recommendation, is to find a way to walk on your sits bones in a way that is truly yours, okay? Not imitating me or any other person that you think moves in a way that you think is better, but instead check in with yourself. See, what is it like to begin to move forward? Maybe you need to do very small steps. Maybe you need to take it easy. If you haven't been walking on your sits bones through most of your life, and this is very foreign to you, I strongly recommend for you to take it very, very easy and to let this build over a period of a few days until you begin to be really used to this way of moving, okay? Now, why is it so important to learn to move this way? Later on, when you take this into your daily life, There's a way to minimize this, to encapsulate this, to make this really, really tiny. And as you sit, to simply be on your sits bones, upright, comfortable, not too far back, engaging all the musculature in the front or in the back as you lean forward and back, but simply be upright somewhere in the middle and shifting your weight. So you can be a little bit more on the left sits bone, on the right sits bone. You can move a little bit forward and back. You know, I'm on my right sits bone now, and I simply move my left sits bone forward and back, right? This is a pretty big movement. It can become a lot smaller. I can just be on my right sits bone and have the left sits bone hovering and barely move forward and back while I'm engaged in conversation, looking at the screen, whatever it is that I'm doing. So this is a wonderful remedy for this modern phenomenon of sitting too much on chairs, and this may help a lot. Okay, play with it. Tell me what you think. Share with me your thoughts, your questions, anything that needs clarification. Let me know. Thank you. Take care. See you next week.